What's going on, everybody? Painblade back here again from Server 1, representing IC and Tribes Lab. Today, guys, we're going to be covering and trying to stop all these myths and speculations about what debuffs are and how they work, what buffs are and how they work, and what stat effects are and how they work, okay? So I want to cover this with you guys because there seems to be a lot of controversy behind, especially how debuffs work and what a debuff really is. So we've done a ton of testing at Tribes Labs, specifically myself, especially behind this, and I wanted to make sure that before I gave you guys the information, you understood how all this worked and what exactly a debuff is and how it works compared to buffs and status effects, okay? So the first thing I want to cover is I'm going to go into the Shinobi list and I'm going to explain to you guys what a debuff is. Now, this is extremely important, okay? Now, what a debuff is anything that reduces the stats of a character, okay, of an opponent. So a debuff is defense down, damage increase rate down, damage rate reduction down, guard rate down, or guard suppression, I guess, for your character, crit suppression down, or any of those status effects. So anything that sits in your status column, any of this that gets reduced is considered a debuff, okay? Now, the way debuffs work, they work completely different than the way status effects work and the way buffs work, okay? So what I mean by that is debuffs cannot stack. So what that means essentially for you is, let's say you have a character like Haku, and you have a character like Mitsuki, and a character like Kabuto, who all have defense down. You cannot take advantage of every single defense down. It does not stack, which means it does not multiply to each other. They don't add up to each other. What debuffs do is they reduce the highest percentage off the opponent only. So if you have 3 defense down, they will not stack. They will only take the highest percentage, and that will apply. Same with same for damage rate reduction down. So for example, Kirin has a skill 2 that does 12%, and then his jutsu does 22. When you do both, it does not add up. It only takes the highest value. So debuffs only take the highest percentage, and they will replace the one before that. They will not add to it, okay? Now, a buff, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. A buff is actually an increase to any status or any base stat, which is HP, attack, and defense. Now, these do stack, okay? So if you have somebody, for example, like Gaara, Asuma, Sasuke Heavy SR, and Jiraiya Sage Mode, and they all have guard rate, well, their percentages actually do stack. So you can actually stack up enough guard rate to have over 100%. And that matters because there are opponents who have guard suppression, which lowers your ability to guard. So buffs do stack. So if you have in the same cell 3 attack buffs that give up in that cell, all 3 of them will add up. So buffs are extremely crucial in terms of setting it up. So debuffs do not stack, buffs do stack. And guys, check out the description. I'm going to name each one out so you guys have an understanding. I may miss a few. If I do, let me know in the comment section, but it will be there. Now, what is the difference between a status effect and what is the difference between a debuff? Okay, so as we mentioned, debuffs are strictly stats that are lowered. Defense, damage rate reduction, crit damage, crit down, etc. Stats, okay? So keep that in mind. Debuff equals stats down. Status effects, on the other hand, are an impeding effect to your opponent, whether that means stopping them completely in their tracks using a paralyze, a stun, or a shadow stitch. A confuse is also a status effect. Okay, a silence is also a status effect, and burns and poisons. Now, I want to cover burns and poisons first. Burns and poisons do stack. So if you have multiple characters that constantly do jutsus or skills with poison, it will stack on one another. So if, let's say, Papa Sasuke, for example, who has a burn skill, let's find him here, wherever he is. He's down here somewhere. There he is. So let's go to the jutsu real quick. Here is the skill. So let's say Inferno style, Fireball Jutsu. When he casts this, he does 10,850 burn damage for 4 turns. So let's say he does that move, right? He hits. And then Sarada also does her Jutsu. Let's find the original Sarada. There she is. And her fire style jutsu also connects and does 1100 or 11,000. So you add those two together. That burn will now be doing 22,000, and you continue going with that. So if Jiraiya does his, you add the other amount onto that, and that will tick every single time on an opponent for the amount of turns that are allotted. Okay, so burns do stack, poisons do stack. So that's very important. So if you have a very big burn team for PvE and you have a very big poison team, you can actually do a ton of damage. I've actually done 100,000 ticks per turn to an opponent before using poison and burn. So it is actually very useful. The only downside to burn and poison is you can't kill the opponent with it. So you'll have to wait till they come into rotation and then actually hit them once. There is a downfall, obviously, if the opponent's faster, they can take you out before you take them out. But nonetheless, it's still a very good thing. So burns and poisons stack. Okay. Now, paralyze, shadow stitch, and stuns. These do not stack. So what I mean by that is this. Okay, so let's go to the original two OGs for stuns. So if we look at heavy, so he has a chance to stun his opponent at 35%. So if, let's say you do stun your opponent, okay, and let's say Kakashi is next, okay, in another cell, and he's about to stun his opponent, his lightning blade will not stun. You cannot override a turn if it's the same status effect. So if you do paralyze with heavy and then you do paralyze, and it has to be the same word. If you do paralyze with Kakashi, you cannot stack the turns on top of each other. It will not activate. But what you can do is a paralyze can be overridden by a stun. Okay, so if we go to, let's say, someone like Dedra, and you do the stun with him, or even Kirin, oh no, Kirin does paralyze, so it's got to be the word stun. So you can override a paralyze with a stun. And also, if you do another paralyze after the stun, you can override the stun with another paralyze. Okay, so that's the key thing. It has to be different word used. So paralyze can be overridden by a stun can be overridden by a paralyze, and a shadow stitch can override either of those. Okay, so that's the difference with that. That's how that works. All right, now status effect rate up and status effect rate down, those buffs will either increase the ability to land those, or the ability, or they will decrease the ability to land those. Okay, so those are debuffs again, right? And again, those cannot stack. So those are the kind of things that you got to look out for. So when you're building your team, guys, keep in mind you do not need to stack a ton of the same debuffs. Okay, so do not put all users that do damage increase rate down, or all users that do damage rate reduction down, or all users that do defense down. Look at your opponent, okay, and pick the highest percentage with one character that can fill that niche, and then put that on your team, and that's it. Everything else should be buffs. Buffs do stack, so make sure you have those on there. And then lastly, status effects. Status effects are super important. Of course, your stuns, but you don't want to have all paralyzed in the same or in different cells, because they will override. They will not override each other. What you want to do sometimes is you want to put a paralyze, for example, in one cell, a stun in the next cell, and then another paralyze in the bottom cell, or a shadow stitch, right? And there's only one shadow stitch in the game, and that's Shikamaru. So if you end up using him, that's who you'll end up using. So that's the kind of thing you want to look at, guys. Okay. So I hope this kind of helps you out. We have done a ton of testing. Okay, so keep in mind, if sometimes you're looking at a character that's doing more damage after a second or third turn, there are limit break 2s that increase, for example, Kakashi's crit damage up every time he has a turn. So your numbers will go up, okay? And it's not because your debuffs are stacking, it's because your LB2s are kicking in. For example, Heavy also has his damage increase rate up, which is a buff. So that does stack every turn. The main thing with stacking for buffs, guys, though, is you want to see it say, for the rest of the battle. If it says for the rest of the battle, that means that will stack every time you have a turn. Okay. If it says only active during the buff is only active during active allies, that buff will only kick in and be removed every single time. So when it's your turn, it'll activate, it'll stack to the rest of the battle ones, but it'll be removed the moment your turn is done. So that one doesn't stack. So the rest of the battle is key. And I will explain that even further. We'll talk about all that stuff in another video, but I really hope this helped you guys out. If you have any further questions, you know where to find me. Obviously, hit me up on these comment sections. Please don't try to DM me through Discord unless it's urgent. I'm getting so many DMs a day. I'm actually losing track of who I'm talking to now. So just send a comment on here. I do my best to reply to you guys instantly if I can, but comment section is definitely the place to go. So I hope this helped, guys. This is Painblade. Enjoy your Friday. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you guys soon. And stay safe out there.